Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first episode of Contrary to Popular Wrestling. I am James Southern, and I am joined on the line right now. Some know him as the Hustler. Some know him as Hugh B. Marks. Some know him as the Creator. Some people create violence. He is one of them. Carmine Despirito, how are you doing, my friend?
You watch my YouTube videos. That's what you did. You watch my YouTube videos.
It's a great promo line, I'm telling you. Some people make violence, some people create it.
Welcome, everybody. This is our first installment of Contrary to Popular Wrestling. It's going to be a different type of podcast. I've seen years and years of different podcasts, and this is going to be quite different. It's going to be conversational, less of an interview. We're not going to talk about any type of wrestling news, per se. It won't be current in that sense. It's going to be topical, and every week we're going to have a certain topic that we're going to speak about and have certain guests call in that applies to that topic. The first topic is going to be the evolution of wrestling culture, starting when we were fans, or when I was a fan, how it was so much different than it is today. And we're going to weigh the pros and cons of that. You know, were we fortunate to have that lack of information readily available at all times? You know, we're going to delve into that. We're also going to talk about how the business has changed. You know, everything from kayfabe to Zubaz and cowboy boots and fanny packs and mullets and and all that jazz.
That's right, we're going to cover it all, and we've got some great guests lined up. We have Evan Ginzburg. Some of you know him as the writer of Wrestling Then and Now. He was also an associate producer for The Wrestler and the sole producer of Wrestling Then and Now, the documentary. We also have Nikita Breznikov with us tonight, the author of When It Was Real with Scott Teal, Howard Baum of Hardway Art, the famous photographer from South Florida, as well as your friend and mine, Vandal Drummond, is going to be joining us to talk growing up in Los Angeles with the wrestling scene out there.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild show. How about we just kick it off right now? Let's get in touch with Evan. Let's kick it off right now. Very excited to have Evan on. You know, back in the day when I was a wrestling fan, so difficult to get information. I mean, we're talking 1980. Our only access to wrestling was what we could see on television. And in New York, I was lucky. I could watch Florida Championship Wrestling, a little bit of Georgia. I could watch, and of course, the WWF shows. And of course, we had the wrestling magazines, which were a big thing. I mean, I knew every day what day of the week they would come out, and I'd be right there to meet the delivery guy before they could take it out of the bundles. Separate from that, in the 80s, and I think a little bit prior to that too, there were some newsletters around that gave some information from around the country. That was in a much more timely fashion than the magazines, because the magazines were 2 months old, at least, news-wise. And newsletters like Evan's truly were the pioneers of fanzines, so to speak.
Well, and with that being said, let's throw it over to Evan Ginzburg. Ladies and gentlemen, our first guest here on Contrary to Popular Wrestling. You might know him as the writer of Wrestling Then and Now newsletter. You might know him as former on-air talent at 99.5 WBAI in New York. He's the former co-host of Legends Radio with Dr. Mike Lano. Now he is the host of Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. He's the associate producer of The Wrestler and 350 Days. He is Evan Ginzburg. Welcome to the podcast, Evan.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate you having me.
You know, I was just saying earlier, Evan, that, you know, being a wrestling fan, growing up in New Jersey, you grew up in New York, that in the 70s and the 80s, I started watching in 1980 when I was 10 years old, but our access to the business was strictly what we could see on television and wrestling magazines, which would be, you know, 2-3 months out of date. And in order to find a newsletter like yours, you know, you had to meet people. So I'd hang out in the back of the buildings and so on when the boys would come out, just like a lot of the other fans. Did you used to do that, by the way? Hang out in the back?
So as a kid, I would stand outside the Garden, sometimes before the matches, sometimes after. Sometimes we didn't even buy a ticket, and we'd just stand out there all night because it was a lot of fun. Interesting side note, the door at the Garden where the wrestlers and the Knicks and the Rangers, etc., would walk in was 7 feet tall. It was clearly designated And Andre the Giant did not have to duck. He was under 7 feet tall, for those who care about such minutia. But anyway, as a kid, we would be out there, and Andre and Dusty Rhodes would never, ever sign for the kids. And George Steele and Lou Albano and Superstar Graham and most of the villains would. So it was like your earliest, like, getting smartened up, quote unquote, getting. It's like, wow, Lou Albano's a nice guy, and Dusty isn't that nice. So it was right, a lot of fun, actually. Yeah, a lot of fun.
Oh, it was a blast back in the days. My dad would drop me off early, whether it be Asbury Park Convention Hall or the Spectrum or the different high school shows and so on. I'd get there early and meet the guys when they came in. And back to what I was saying, the only way to know about a newsletter would be to meet somebody, to meet another fan, that followed the newsletter. And it was so difficult to get insider news if you were on the outside back then. And today it's just readily available.
Yeah, it was very primitive Xerox newsletters or sheets or dirt sheets, whatever you'd like to call them. And basically you'd meet somebody outside an arena and they'd have one in their back pocket and you'd go, what's that? And they'd show it to you. And, even the very earliest observers looked very primitive and nothing was slick. And this, of course, was pre-internet. I mean, they had sheets going back to the 70s. They'd have a lot of clippings from around the country and results. But again, this was like your really first experience at getting smartened up, because you'd say, wait a second, Fred Blassie is hated in New York and he's loved in L.A. Like, what's going on here? And, you kind of piece it all together, yeah.
Right, exactly. It was the first. Now, let me ask you, what year did you start the newsletter, Wrestling Then and Now?
1990.
90. Okay.
But I contributed it to many newsletters prior, as a writer, as a correspondent. So I went back probably a decade before that. But my own newsletter started in 90 and ran for a good 20 years. And basically the internet killed it, because everything was free and readily accessible. Yeah.
The internet killed wrestling magazines, and hence the demise of my magazine, Wrestling Eye. There was something like 16 different magazines at one time that you could find on a newsstand. And I don't know about you, but man, I would know when the delivery guy would show up, and I'd know the time of day and be there waiting for those magazines.
It was very innocent back then. The magazines were kayfabe, with the exception of The Ring. The Ring would have actual results from all over the world.
Wrestling Review, I did a pretty good job of doing that as well.
Well, for the most part, it was, even the interviews were made up for the most part. And But it was still great. There were your heroes and favorite villains on the cover, covered in blood. And as a horny teen, there were the apartment house wrestling pictures and et cetera, so on.
A little tits and ass to sell a magazine, yeah.
Oh, yeah, blood and TNA. That's what sold those magazines. And, of course, whoever was hot at the time, Bruno, Billy Graham, Dusty. Yeah, you'd see the same people on the covers all the time.
Right. And, I don't know if, wrestling fans today, current fans, understand that, wrestlers didn't set up and sell gimmicks. They didn't, sit out there during intermission and, sell their T-shirts and sign pictures. It wasn't like that back then at all.
Yeah, I remember when Arezzi started doing his conventions, John Arezzi, he brought in the Sheik. He brought in the original Sheik, and it was like, oh, my God, this guy's going to sit there and sign. But he's not going to talk because he's going to stay in character. It was a different world. People don't realize,
Yeah, exactly. Tell me, what would be your greatest memory as a fan?
Greatest memory? God. I think you have to go back to your first show. June 24, 1974, I stepped into Madison Square Garden, and I had a black and white TV, okay? So all of a sudden, you're seeing these guys in color, Okay,
Right.
22,000 people. Nikolai and Blassie against Bruno and Strongbow. The Valiants against Ho and Garea. I mean, it was like Marvel superheroes and villains come to life in glorious color. Bleeding buckets, the building shaking. Today is Jimmy Valiant's 78th birthday by sheer coincidence.
God bless him.
People,
yes,
people have people have no idea. The Valiant brothers would walk down the aisle. No music, no pyro, no video. The building would shake. The building would shake. Bruno was in the main event, and the only way to describe Bruno for the younger fans who never saw him live, we loved that guy. He was like saint-like. That's the only way to explain it.
Absolutely was.
Yeah, Pedro also. We loved these guys. And, as kids, you're total marks. And, it's like, is he going to come back from this? And it was a super heavyweight territory. So they bring in these monstrous guys like Kowalski and Don Leo Jonathan and Ernie Ladd. Because you'd say they had a chance against Bruno, because Bruno was like Superman. So Bruno would make these comebacks, 10, 15 years before Hogan, and it was pretty much the same thing. Like, all of a sudden, he'd be coming back, and the people would go out of their minds, absolutely out of their minds.
One thing we could say about wrestling fans now in the New York area, Bruno really, really did attract a lot of Italian-American fans. And it can be said that just about every Dago had two pictures on their wall, a picture of the Pope and a picture of Bruno. And
Sinatra.
That's how idolized the guy was. I'm thinking about something here. I'll bet we were at the same show. Were you at the Bruno Sammartino retirement match at the Meadowlands?
Yeah, with George Steele, which went with 6 minutes and was very disappointing. And then he came back 20 more times anyway. So
right. And
yeah.
it was kind of odd too, the retirement show, because I thought it was like underplayed. In fact, if you listen to the interviews now, it didn't seem like it was really going to be his retirement anyway. I mean, yeah, Bruno said it, but it wasn't hyped that much. I never really understood that. No, but that was the first event ever at the Meadowlands, by the way.
Yes, yeah. They had an old timers battle royale at the Meadowlands also.
Evan. I was there.
Yeah, which was they had Pat O'Connor and Lou Thez going toe to toe, hold for hold at the end, which was remarkable, and that was really not promoted well, and they didn't draw a great crowd for that either.
James, how would you have liked to have seen Lou Thez and Pat O'Connor square off one-on-one at the Meadowlands?
You want to talk about stuff of dreams. And, I think that's a difference, too, with fans that have been around for, 30, 40 years. They remember that first card. Evan, you went down the list, match for match, of that first Madison Square Garden card you attended, versus a lot of modern fans, some guys were there, I don't remember match for match, but it was able to make such an impression with you that it stuck with you, all this time later.
Well, what people don't really understand is, I'm a middle-aged guy, so my father is gone, and you go back to that night, my father's gone. Bruno, Nikolai, who became a friend, is gone. Blassie's gone. They're all gone. Strongbow's gone. So it's just a memory from your childhood that's, etched with you forever. It really has deep meaning. Your father took you to something that you loved. He wasn't the biggest wrestling fan in the world until he started taking me. He loved the Knicks. He loved the Knicks more than wrestling, but it was something his kid wanted to do, and he learned to love it. He loved Tolos. John Tolos wrestled Bruno that same summer, and he loved Tolos because the interviews were just amazing, and he was a great heel, Tolos, and people forget him because if people came before the Hulkamania era, there's not a lot of video, and a lot of these guys are kind of forgotten, but it's something
James,
you did with your father.
James?
How do you spell wrestling?
Tolos.
That's right. He called Bruno a spaghetti bender. Those were tough words back then. Tough words. Fighting words, yeah.
Those are fighting words. Ernie
That's
Ladd
right.
would get them all. Ernie Ladd has some choice words for them, too, right?
I stole a line from Ernie Ladd. I've used this my entire quote-unquote career. He used to go, "You missed the birth of your mother and father. Don't miss this." It's a great line.
Oh, that's got to be a top 5 or top 3 lines ever.
Whenever I'm promoting something, I use this. It's so old, it's new. People don't know who I stole it from.
It's the wrestling business. You wait 20 years.
Absolutely. Hey, everything worth doing has been done anyway to begin. I mean, it's all been done. It's all been done pretty much. And everything is new nowadays. Old is new. I have to ask you, any memories, because to me it's just like a mythical place, the Sunnyside Gardens.
Oh, yeah. I saw the Executioners, Kowalski and John Studd versus Billy White Wolf and Chief J Strongbow, 2 out of 3 falls. And what was remarkable was there was no air conditioning. It was a summer like this where it was like 95 degrees every day. The fans were dying. Kowalski's in a mask, and he just keeps coming at them for 45, 50 minutes, 2 out of 3 falls. The guy was like a machine. I'll never forget it. We were like, how is this guy not dying under that mask? We were dying sitting there.
All because he wanted to keep his toupee on.
Whatever, right? Yeah, whatever the case. Him and Bruno would have toupee versus toupee match. Yeah.
I'll bet you could cut the cigarette smoke with a knife at the Sunnyside Gardens.
Oh, yeah. And I'll tell you something. I live in Queens, New York to this day, and when you go by there, which is now tragically a Wendy's, it was also a boxing and roller derby mecca, so there's actually a little plaque outside honoring it as a historical boxing venue. It says nothing about the wrestling or the roller derby.
Oh, wow. How about that? Well, it's the same in L.A. with Hollywood Legion Stadium. It's now it's a gym and really undistinguishable from the old building. Still a lot of wrestling history out there, you know, if folks want to track it down. And I guess that's one of the benefits, if anything, of the internet and the age that we're in. I mean, hey, James Southard, Southard, would you be in the business today, you think, without the internet?
Absolutely not, because, that was one of the first things I did when, and I guess that was a benefit of being of the age I am. As soon as I started watching wrestling and said, how do I get a part of this? I was lucky enough to have all that information out there. I didn't have to break the secret wall of, well, is it a work? How do I get in? I guess I was lucky enough to have it there and not have to go searching for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, this kid here, Evan, a real prodigy. And he'll never forget how to spell wrestling. Is that right? James, you'll never forget. Because
T-O-L-O-S. Tolos.
That's right.
He writes everything down, Evan. He writes everything down.
let me just say one thing about the problem with the internet. And I see this all the time. You get younger people who will say things, and I'm pretty much quoting. They'll say, for example, Nikolai was boring. Okay, they're judge, which is insane, because if you were there, Nikolai versus Bruno, the charisma, the heat was just off the charts. So they're judging 50-year-old, 40-year-old, 45-year-old matches by AJ Styles, Okada.
Right.
The criteria. A guy writes, Lou Albano is one of the worst managers of all time. I'm like, are you insane? Are you insane?
Gives me chest pains. That gives me
the heat was absolutely off the charts.
Bad man. Oh,
yeah,
my God.
And the promos were unbelievable. And I could go on and on and on where I see these things, and there's no reference. The reference point is they're judging them by today's standards. And believe me, I am not one of these guys. There's been no good wrestling since the territories. I'm not one of those dinosaurs. I'll sit there and watch Okada, Naito, et cetera, so on, any night of the week and love it. But I don't enjoy WWE anymore. It's a circus.
Yeah. Well, I decided here, and James and I have talked about it. I have a great deal of respect for everybody in the business. The guys that are in the business today, I really am going to avoid at all costs being critical of them. I think it's very difficult for them. Fortunately, we were lucky in the business, and we broke into the wrestling business the way it was meant to be. And as a fan, we had an experience that no one will ever have again. They won't have the experiences that we had as a fan. It's literally impossible.
Yeah, I tell people some of the best nights of my life, seeing James Brown in his prime, Al Green, George Clinton, etc., so on, but seeing heel Roddy Piper at Madison Square Garden, where he'd come to the ring with, whether it was solo, whether it was with Orton. Yeah, whether it was with Orton as a tag team, and it's like absolute chaos where from one second to the other you didn't know what he was going to do. I don't think he knew what he was going to do. And then when it was all over, you could breathe again. Again. And I don't think anybody can imagine what it was like to see heel Piper live. So I go on the internet the other day, and they're like, I never liked Roddy Piper. He wasn't much of a wrestler. Like, you weren't there. You don't get it. You just don't get it.
Possibly one of the greatest, period. And that being, to me, and I think we'll share this opinion, that you can't view work rate of the older guys. It's all about who put asses in seats. If you got heat, you sold tickets as a heel, right? It's just that simple. Really, really is. And Nikolai, oh my God, how many times I should look it up. I have Scott Teal's book. I could look up how many times Nikolai wrestled at Madison Square Garden.
Nikolai headlined the Garden 11 times. 11 Ivan Koloff headlined the Garden 13 times. Okay? Wow. I mean, it's remarkable. These guys should have been multi-millionaires. They were never paid what they deserved. Of course, they didn't get the 401ks and health benefits and pensions. When all is said and done, these guys never should have had to think about money again. The money that these guys drew. And, for people to be critical.
That's another difference in wrestling culture. The amount of money that wrestlers make today as opposed to years ago. Yeah, quite a difference. Quite a difference.
Yeah, the guys on top, it's still the vast majority are never going to pay the bills as a wrestler, but the guys on top, sure, absolutely.
Well, Evan, I want to thank you for your time and coming on the first edition here of our podcast. We're definitely going to be having you on again. I find you're a great guy, a fascinating guest. We have a lot more to talk about in the future.
My pleasure. Anytime. And if I could help you in any way to promote the show, I'm happy to as well. And, thanks for
Anything
doing
you like
this.
To plug, Evan?
You can check out my show, Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast, with Buddy Sotelo, my co-host. We drop usually Saturday nights on YouTube and on our Facebook page. And, of course, check out 350 Days.
What a great film. What a great film. If you have not seen 350 Days, you have to see it. It's on Amazon Prime, right?
Yeah, Amazon Prime, iTunes, every major cable system. We have worldwide distribution, so check out that. Check out Wrestling Then and Now on Amazon Prime with Nikolai and Kowalski and Don Dr. Death Arnold.
Oh, I really enjoyed that too. I just saw that one the other week.
Thank you.
For the first time.
we try to do movies from the heart as opposed to the umpteenth shoot interview.
Right.
We try to
we really need more shoot interviews.
I enjoy it, but I really have to be extremely interested to stare at a guy's head for 2 hours. It's.
I hear you, Evan. I hear you. Thank you very much, my brother. We'll be in touch down the road.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Take care.
Have a great night.
Bye-bye. You too. Bye-bye.
And a huge thank you to Evan Ginzburg for coming on the show. Again, I recommend 350 Days. It's the greatest wrestling documentary I've ever seen. Our next guest, we mentioned Nikolai Volkov, is a good friend and the manager of Nikolai Volkov. Now let's throw it over to our interview with Nikita Breznikov.
My comrade, Nikita Breznikov. Welcome to Contrary to Popular Wrestling.
Wow, I love the title, and I love being with you, my brother.
Thank you so much. We're talking about wrestling culture, the evolution of wrestling culture from the times when we were wrestling fans, today's business.
Okay.
You wrote such a great book, and I want to plug this just right off the bat. I've told as many people that will listen about When It Was Real, co-authored by Scott Teal. It documents the WWF, from 1970 to for about 10 years, right? Through like 79?
Yes, it concludes at 1979.
We're talking about detailed reports of matches and angles, which just astound me how you were able to, you must have kept a lot of notes back in the day.
You know what, Carmine? I didn't keep notes. I kept it close to my heart and my brain. And that's why, now, I have an extensive collection of video. It started as video, then turned into DVD. So the things that I had on tape from Madison Square Garden or the Spectrum or television, I could go over. But the things from Baltimore and Washington, they were never taped. That all came from my heart and my head.
What a memory. What a memory. You know what's really, I always find it strange. I'll be watching WWF Championship Wrestling from 1981, let's say, and first time I've seen it in 40 years, I'll see something on there. Now, I'll say to myself, I remember that, like verbatim. Like I can hear Captain Lou's interview, and I can recall what he's about to say. Do you have the similar experience?
Oh, my God. You want me to go on? I could I could imitate things without a doubt, yes.
Right? I mean, I could just recall what was said 40 years prior. It clicks in my mind. And I can remember a match, maybe an insignificant match on TV, and be able to recall that from 40 years ago.
Because it was that important to you. And that's what clicks with us. And I think the difference between then and now, then it mattered. Now it's just something on television. I mean, they have their fan base.
Right. It's not as memorable.
No.
And I believe that we were very, very fortunate as wrestling fans to come up the time that we did. We have great memories that are ingrained in our brain. I believe that today's wrestling fans, I don't think they're having the same experience.
No, and I think for the heels it's great because they don't have to fight for their life to get in and out of arenas. But we took it so to heart that we would throw just about anything, bolts, batteries, whatever, at the heels as they came and went. I saw one night Ivan Koloff, because in Baltimore, they had an extension to the building where they parked their vehicles, and it was a large gate. It was one of these like metal gates, and it would turn slowly. You couldn't see who was on the other side, but we were waiting, and you could hear that. It was going up. It's like, who is it? Who is it? Somebody would duck, and they're like, it's Koloff! So people got their ammunition ready, and man, he's gunning the engine because he knows these bastards are going to start hurling everything at him. And as soon as that gate cleared the roof, he floored it. He took off, and we're throwing things at the car. He went the wrong way down a major thoroughfare just to get away from those crazy fans. I'm telling you, it was wild.
You know, that is the truth. The amount of heat that some guys had, like for me in New York, 1980, when Larry Zubaz turned on Bruno Sammartino. Oh my God. Larry Zubaz had to be the most hated man in the Northeast. I mean, just to the average person, I remember, would know that I was a wrestling fan. They'll say, did you see what that dirty son of a bitch Zubaz did? I mean, right? Yes. The heat crossed over.
And coincidentally, tomorrow is the anniversary of the cage match in Shea Stadium. But I did not write about that because it was 1980 and I stopped at 1979. But I'll say it till the end of my time. That was the greatest feud in wrestling, without a doubt. That really was. That had the most heat, and it had legitimacy. To see that, I think, Carmine, that was the thing. They
Yep.
had a history, a realistic history, starting in 1974, Bruno and Zubaz. And, we watched them through the years. We watched Larry. Then all of a sudden they come up with this heel turn, and it was like it meant something. It meant everything. It was like, we can't be witnessing this. It's just not possible that Zubaz would do this to Bruno. And, the heat was just incredible.
And it was so simply done.
Yeah,
it was
so
simply done. It was just a chair shot, really.
Yeah, yes.
That's
all
it was.
You needed.
And Bruno bled buckets.
But you know what? I say the thing that really made it, Larry was the consummate pro, because there's no way in hell you're going to beat Bruno. You're not going to outpower him. You're not going to be. He had to be a coward. He had to just duck and run. Get Bruno with a ball shot here and there to get some advantage, run his mouth, and run away. And it was like, man, that made us want him to see Bruno murder him even more. So he was perfect the way he played it out.
Absolutely. Even after I broke in the business, I thought they had real heat. So
yeah,
it was one of those things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they wouldn't be seen in public or anywhere talking to each other. That would never happen.
They kept it alive for years. That was great.
Kayfabe.
Yes, sir.
And that's something else we're going to talk about here. Kayfabe, which is just what a major difference in the business from years ago to now. The term kayfabe isn't even used, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Give me your greatest memory as a wrestling fan.
It's easy for me. It was November 28th, 1973. The first live show that I attended. Now, I had been watching it on television since 1970, but to be in that arena, the Baltimore Civic Center, it was just like a child's dream come true. I was 15 years old, but to me, it was an adult Disneyland. So I'm there, and, people are... my best friend's father had taken us, because at that time, it was a very seedy section of Baltimore. You wouldn't let a teenager go down there alone. So the friend's father, he takes us. It was a battle royal that night. Pedro was still champion. So I'm sitting there, and it was a smell. I'll never forget that, Carmine. Not an odor, but it was a smell of the building. It was excitement in the air. It was wild. So one person says to me, you see that stage? And it was the biggest curtain I'd ever seen in my life on that stage. He said, wrestlers will peek their head out from time to time. Of course, later we come to learn they're trying to gauge the house, so the promoter doesn't give them a short payday. They're trying to get a good gauge how many are actually there. So I just gazed on that stage to see if any heads would peek out. I saw curtains move, but I never seen anybody peek out. Then all of a sudden, here come the old men for the State Athletic Commission walking to their place, and they killed the house lights, and only the ring lights are on. Man, it was like I'm going to put Ray Stevens, the singer, over in his song, The Blue Cyclone. When they dimmed the lights and the crowd went wild, yes. People started screaming. It's like, what's happening? They're like, they're getting ready to start. Well, of course, you had the opening match. But then when the guys for the Battle Royal came out, I described it as an army marching into battle, because that's what it looked like. Everybody was, there's Chief, there's Tanaka and Fuji, and Andre's first appearance in Baltimore. It was like, oh, man, unbelievable. Iron Mike McCord was there. It was just unbelievable. Tony Gurria, so many, Dean Ho. But you know what? That was Pedro's very last successful title defense that Wednesday night. And then that following Saturday, December 1st, he would lose to Stasiak in Philadelphia. So, I mean, I'll never forget that first experience. And Tanaka and Fuji had Chief, as they were the last three contestants in the Battle Royal. Chief could put up a fight. He lost. Tanaka laid on Fuji for the pin, and then he wrestled Pedro. And I remember when he lost to Pedro, he was leaving the ring, and some idiot decided to take a swing at him. And Tanaka just looked at him. He gave him that, yeah! And when he chopped that dumb bastard, that guy flew 4 rows into the seats. He was off his feet and airborne. It's like, man, I can't believe anybody would do that. You got to be crazy. Professor Tanaka was like a tank.
Well, there was real heat there.
Yeah.
And that's something that, James, you are never going to be able to witness what it is for a heel to get real fucking heat. You're never going to... I feel terrible, to tell you that, James, but... you're never going to be able to experience that.
I know, it's one of those things that if I could get in the time machine right now and go back, I absolutely would. It sounds crazy to say you want to see people get shot at and stabbed and damn near killed. But I would go back in a heartbeat.
Oh, well, James, listen, when you talk about that, when Blackjack Mulligan was stabbed up in Boston, and the guy that did the stabbing disinfected after the stabbing. It wasn't just he wanted to cut him. He wanted to make sure he was going to really get sick. That was March 15th of 71. Blackjack didn't come back until the show in July in the Garden. And somebody mentioned this because I posted it on my Facebook page a couple days ago, and they said, gee, it was only like a 2-minute match. And it was like, yeah, I said that was his return. He wrestled Bruno. I guess Bruno wanted to get him a nice payday. It was like, we'll give you a nice quick match because, Mulligan hadn't worked for so long. But it was like, wow, that's how serious it was. Monsoon saved his life. He grabbed the towel, ran out, wrapped it.
Wow, some great stories. That is a legendary story. Have you heard that one before, James?
I have not. Out of the many stabbing stories I have heard, that was not one of them.
Well, he had a lot of heat. Mulligan had a tremendous amount of heat, too. And in all of his runs with New York, honestly. Him and Andre. Actually, that's probably my favorite match of Andre's.
Well, I tell you, I say that's my favorite opponent of Andre was Blackjack
Right? I
Mulligan.
agree, yes.
Stud was like watching the paint dry. It was that stinkeroo. And I like Stud as Chuck O'Connor and the Executioner, but that stank. Kowalski was good, but they didn't do a whole lot. Don Leo Jonathan had a pretty good little thing with him, but Killer Khan, he just murdered Khan. I love Khan too, but he always got murdered. But Mulligan could get in there. And Mulligan slammed Andre at the Spectrum on September the 18th, 1982 in the 6-man match. And it was like...
I think I was there. Yeah, I was there. Yeah, 6-man, I believe, with the Strongbos. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was there.
And Fuji Saito.
I used to go to the Spectrum a lot. My dad used to take me. It was easier to go to the Spectrum on a Saturday night than it was to go to the Garden on a Monday night. Dad would have to take off work. So we drive an hour and a half down to Philly. What great memories I have. Okay, one of them is the first time I ever heard a boring chant. And it was 1983, I want to say. It was Andre and Stud. And
there you go.
Stud had Andre in a front face lock, and they just sat there. It's on YouTube. I believe they sit there for something like 3 minutes. Andre fell asleep.
That was the June 4th show, yes, without a doubt.
Didn't Andre fall asleep? That's what I
Well, it's hard to tell from the TV, but it seems like it. It was like, oh, no, you got to be kidding me. This is just like too much.
And just recalling that, I witnessed one of the first boring chants ever in wrestling.
That
pretty
deserved
much.
it.
Right, and
that
they
one
definitely deserved it. Nikita, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to be having you on again. There's so much you want to talk about. You and I have our mutual friend in Nikolai Volkov. He's definitely somebody that I'd like to dedicate a show to. There's so much to be said about him. One of the funniest guys to be around. His great line was, I don't fuck around, just up and down. That was my favorite.
Just up and down. Oh, yes.
I don't fuck around, just up and down. And, of course, his horse impersonations, which have never been replicated.
And a magician. He's a great magician.
Oh, with those, with those red sponge balls. Yeah?
That's hysterical. But that son of a bitch card trick where he makes that card appear under your hat, under your... I'm like, I watched it 100 times. I don't know it. And I said, tell me. He said, no, you watch. I'm not going to get you. You watch. I'm like, son of a bitch, I don't know how you do this. It's amazing, though.
I'm just going to tell you.
It was great.
Thanks again, Nikita. Once again, the name of the book is When It Was Real. They can get that at crowbarpress.com.
Yes. That's it.
Excellent.
Crowbar Press. The Kindle version's on Amazon, but the full book has all the clippings, which really adds to it. It's just double the fun.
Nikita, thanks again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for Danya Tavares.
Ladies and gentlemen, you know him as the owner of Hardway Art. You've seen his photography in Gong Magazine, Wrestling Review, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, on the cover of the Jake Roberts Pick Your Poison DVD and Gary Hart's book. Ladies and gentlemen, you know him from the 605 Super Podcast. You love him. The one, the only, handsome Howard Baum. How you doing, Howard?
Woohoo! Thank you so much, guys. It's an honor to be here. What an auspicious occasion.
It is an auspicious occasion. James, do you know what Howard Howard and I have in common?
I do not.
We both grew up in Union, New Jersey. Creepy, huh?
We frequented the same Dairy Queen as a child.
We lived in the shadow of the Union, New Jersey water tower.
Which is our town's claim to fame. That and Robert Wool.
Robert Wall, yeah, and don't forget about Ray Liotta.
Ray Liotta, George Costanza, Springfield.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know.
Yeah, a lot of luminaries. Jeff Ross, he's pretty over these days. Right,
oh, yeah,
right. Artie Lang.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you and me.
I know the people are anxious for us to have a 45-minute discussion about Jimmy Buffs right now, but Jimmy Buffs, baby, Route 22.
They don't know from Jimmy Buffs, baby. The best Italian hot dogs. Let me tell you what. Now I'll start talking with a Jersey accent. You know what I'm saying? Let me tell you.
Right, get our Jersey people up in here.
You don't know. It's a shame. It's a shame, but you just don't fucking know.
I'll just sit my Oklahoma ass over here.
Peppers, onions, potatoes. What makes it is that pizza bread, right?
Unseen anyplace else. Actual pizza dough molded into a pita-like sandwich, stuffed with peppers and onions and hot dog and sausage and whatnot, all stewing in a big giant pool of grease for like 8 years before you get there. So it's just perfect when you walk in the door.
Unbelievable.
It looks gross. It sounds gross, but it's the greatest. It's the greatest thing ever, for real. Just don't use ketchup. That's grotesque.
All right. Well, the reason why you're here is that we're having a conversation, Algonquin round table discussion, so to speak, of the evolution of wrestling culture and how it's changed so much from when you were a fan, when I was a fan. Let's start off with that, Howie. Oh, excuse me. I just called you Howie. I have to edit that out.
You know you did that on purpose.
Edit that out.
Oh, that's okay. You know what? I usually hate that, but it's endearing when it comes from you. You're the exception.
I'm leaving that in. That's not getting edited out.
Only Carm can call me Howie.
See what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying here, James? It's creepy, right? It's creepy. All right. You're greatest.
You guys ought to see us in action. You guys ought to see us in action. First of all, I want to say that I consider Carmine the Toastmaster General of professional wrestling, the Dean Martin of professional wrestling, and I want to say that if you guys out there are maybe listening for your first time, just stay tuned because Carmine is one of the greatest natural raconteurs in the history of professional wrestling. He's got the stories, he's got the people to talk to, he's got the psychology, and he's interested in different strains of things than you might used to be hearing that we're pretty much on the same page. So I know we're going to have a great time, and let's not filibuster any longer. Would you like to hear?
You call me a raconteur. I love that.
You're a natural. If you folks want to,
thank you for putting me over. I really do appreciate it.
If you folks want to picture Carmine in his rightful environment, you're picturing a big red leather lounge corner table in a 1962 Las Vegas joint with the drinks flowing and the people coming and going. Carm is a natural raconteur for the biz, like I say, and also his passion for the business, much like his cough, is highly infectious. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy the Carmine Desperado show. Contrary to popular wrestling, how cool is that?
So
let's begin at the beginning. We'll
please,
be in the pre-show interview. I don't mean to hijack things here, but I'm like the Richard Lewis of professional wrestling. I got a lot of points I want to hit. You want to talk about early fan experiences? For every fan, I think it's the same: first TV exposure, first live exposure, etc. We could begin there, or we could talk about how the actual culture, which I think is the theme of the show as well. So up to you. I'm up for grabs.
Begin somewhere, will you?
Well, it's a little boring to quote my. This is my first angle and everything. So let me just say this. I think the standard. All right, I'll just give the basic 101 speech. This is the first show, my first experience on it. And for those of you not familiar with me or Carm, we are both purists in the sense that Eric Clapton was a purist in his Yardbirds days when it comes to sticking to the values of traditional professional wrestling, the way that it was intended from day one. And as Jack Briscoe said, credibility is the coin of the realm. Okay, having said that, I think that I speak for a lot of the lapsed fans and the people who are disgusted with today's product, and I don't want to crap on anyone, and I'm not here to deny anybody their dreams. I'm not here to call anyone anything bad. But here's what I'm saying, is that if you are not wrestling under the auspices of kayfabe, you are not in the wrestling business. You are in the entertainment business. You are in the irony and buffoonery business. But you are not in the professional wrestling business. If you want to conduct yourself like that, if you want to go on social media and compliment your opponents and talk about the guy that you were just in an angle with on national TV and say, oh, here's another guy that I'm going to work with next week and everything. Let's kill all believability whatsoever. So I'm just going to go on record as saying that anything you hear from me comes from this place. It's not crapping on today's generation. It is simply sticking up for kayfabe. And kayfabe was professional wrestling. Professional wrestling is dead, in my estimation, because you can't put that toothpaste back into the tube. People could have maintained kayfabe during the social media thing. It could have flourished. Look at MJF. Look at CM Punk. They know how to get over, keep their characters.
Well, it's also fun. It's also fun being a heel. When I would leave the building after I managed on a particular night, if there was a babyface standing there and I had my bag and I'm walking out the door and he's standing there, I'm going to say something to him. You know, I mean, and just to get the attention of the fans and the reaction of the fans. You know, a lot of them would laugh, but there was a curiosity there. Like maybe these two guys really don't like each other. And, and I think it's so simple to do, just to kayfabe who you're working with. I used to have a rule in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when I ran shows, that I didn't want heels and baby faces to be seen together at the bar. I said, I just don't like that. I don't see a reason for it. If anything, that doesn't draw you any money. The illusion, just to get people talking, from that standpoint. And if anything, start some shit with your opponent at the bar, if anything, and have some fun with it. And I don't know if the guys really have a whole lot of fun with it or see the value in that.
Right. Well, what's sad is the guys that do try to be a kayfabe worker now. So, I mean, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but you got to understand where I'm coming from. Much like yourself, I was a very hated manager for a brief period of time. I was a promoter. We were both in the magazine business. You as an editor, me as a photographer. And we know that the fun of it was being a heel. And by the same token, now, when last time I worked as a manager, it was 1989, and it was in front of a great audience because even though kayfabe had been eroding by that time at the hands of Vince McMahon, I was a manager in these little towns in Florida, like cotton-picking towns and lime-picking towns and stuff, where people weren't hip. They weren't reading the Wrestling Observer. And I was working for Tyree at the time. I had a promotion with Tyree in 84, but in 89 he called me up to live the dream and be a manager, and I became Handsome Howard. And I came out there, and it worked, because I knew what to do, and it was just through osmosis. I knew what to do, and it was great. It was the greatest experience of my life, definitely one of my top 3 wrestling experiences, to have a crowd actually kayfabe hate you. Actually, it's...
Did they chant Howie? Did they chant Howie at you?
Well, I only say that because you couldn't pay me to go out there in front of a crowd now. Why would you want to go out? Would you manage in front of a crowd now?
With it all exposed?
With it all exposed like that, where it's not even, you can't, there's nothing you can cling to as far as believability,
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what, the business has changed so much, and I don't know necessarily if it is about believability anymore. I think we might be way, way past that. But, for example, when Paul E. cuts a promo and the heavens open up, oh my God, he's got them in the palm of their hand. So that's real. That's believable when he cuts a promo. Right. And there's things like that I think wrestling needs more of, less contrived. Everything seems so scripted. And I think more improv would benefit the business. But then again, I said it earlier, I didn't start this podcast to really be critical of the guys today. Unfortunately, the business changed, and the business is what it is right now. There's very little that we can do about it, regardless of how much we talk about it, pontificate about it. It is the way it is, and I think that there's a lot of guys out there today that are such great athletes. Would you say that the guys today are more athletic, just from an athletic standpoint, than the guys of yesteryear?
Well, no question about that. Over the last 25 years, we used to have like Bobby Duncombe, Killer Cox, big lumbering guys, Ox Baker. Now you have 852 guys who are all cut, who can all do every move in the book from the top to the bottom of the card. The thing is, they're all interchangeable, and nobody cares because it's just one move after another with no psychology. And like, I hate to even sit here and say that because that's what everyone says, and I like to be unique when I say words out of my face. But I mean, it's just young guys who are incredible athletes and women. Tell me, which do you prefer? The days right now when we have 850 million hot ladies, or when every woman worker looked like a truck driver in a one-piece bathing suit?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. See Mula at the Garden. Oh, Maran.
Yeah.
Was that something else? All right?
That's tamale.
James, are you getting some insight here?
Oh, I'm just sitting and soaking it all in. You know what? I think the next show is just going to be you two talking, and I'll just sit back here and press record.
Oh, I didn't know you actually talked on this show. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's good. I just sit and soak up knowledge.
I get a bad reputation.
Prodigy, Howard. Really. I asked him earlier. We were speaking about John Tolos with Evan Ginzburg, and I said, James, how do you spell wrestling?
T-O-L-O-S.
T-O-L-O-S, right? So he writes down everything. Every bit of information that James gets, he writes down. He is priding himself on being a true wrestling historian.
Cool. What was John Tolos' brother, James?
Chris.
Ah, there you go.
That's it. Carmine beat me to it.
Just checking. I don't want we're the gatekeepers now. We're the gatekeepers for the business. The 75th most peripheral people in the business are now the gatekeepers because, this is our time.
How about being a fan in Florida? There are some wild stories. I know there are. From the days of Dusty and Kevin Sullivan, West Palm Beach, Miami, so on. Would you share a story from back then?
Well, I mean, I hung around Kevin Sullivan a little bit. I found him to be really cool. He always had a joke, and one day I was in the back of the Miami Beach Convention Center during a really big card, the Salt and Pepper Jam. Bob Geigel came in for it, and everybody was posing for pictures. All the international photographers were there. So the Zambui Express were about to pose for a picture, and Sullivan comes out with this big snake, and Leroy Brown is terrified. He starts running around like, oh my God, I don't want to pose with that snake. But it's not really my Leroy Brown impersonation, and then Sullivan is like Sherman and Septic, the Tank Brothers. But he was, I mean, for all his demonic stuff and everything, he was just totally cool and chill. Like, whenever I was around him, he was really cool. I was practically a mere child. I was 18 in 1984, so, I went with my dad. There wasn't any carousing. We didn't go to the Skyways Lounge afterwards and carouse with the Riazats and the guys or anything, but I wish I was just a couple of years older where I could have hung out at Art Stock's Playpen with my mentor Bruce Owens, who was the timekeeper, ring announcer there in the Miami Beach Convention Center. And if I was just a few years older, I could have made some different towns and, hung out with the guys afterward, but I was still pretty much a child during my Florida days, so I wasn't exposed to too much debauchery.
Wrestlers' behavior changed, and it used to be, getting back to the hotel, having some drinks, picking up a rat, or, a female groupie, right? We have to try to be politically correct.
Right, I'm glad you clarified. Right.
Well, yeah,
keep it classy.
Throw some carne on it, it'll be fine.
That has all changed completely. I remember going to the Marriott in Philadelphia when the NWA was in town.
Right.
And I mean, everybody, Tully and Rick and, the whole crew there. And just, they'd be in the bar talking to girls and in the lobby and, with a drink in their hand. And, it was a different scene, a different mentality back then.
Well, it was so cool. We had the same thing down here in Miami at the Marriott. And it would be, I remember, it always seemed to be on a Saturday they would run here. So they'd finish the show, and then we'd watch Saturday Night Main Event often on the bar TV. And I remember seeing Flair and the Rockers, just everybody. It was like the Land of a Thousand Dances video, except in a bar setting. So just like you said, everyone's like carousing and carrying on. I did my trademark bump into a guy and spill his drink and draw tremendous heat. It's like my big trick. Either lose control of my drink and drop it on somebody's foot or do something. That's like my big trick to get over with everyone. So one time I bumped into Paul Diamond, and I'm like, oh, sorry, man, I'm friends with DDP. He goes, I don't care who you're friends with. And I was like, well, you have no charisma, so good luck.
Right. Right. James?
That was in my head, though. That was only in my head.
Well, all I gotta say is, of course, being in the Miami Beach Convention Center was, probably one of the greatest Florida towns. So you were shooting photos for the magazine then. You've always said, Bill Apter never paid you, but there were some of those magazines where you could do okay if you had a few good shots. So what was it like shooting for some of those Japanese magazines like Gong and Weekly Fight?
Well, Japan was the money. Japan paid $350 per roll, and that was just Weekly Fight, which it wasn't even as big as Gong. And I didn't officially work for Gong, but they used some of my stuff somehow. I saw some of my stuff in there at a later time, but I had an ongoing relationship with Weekly Fight, Joji Inoue, which was a weekly newspaper there, and they wanted it the next day. So I'd shoot it Wednesday night and get it out to them, as quickly as possible the next day, and the check would come for $350. And so the Apter thing was the prestige. Like, every photographer wanted to be an Apter photographer because you get your name nice and big and bold next to the legendary photographers that I grew up reading, that everybody did. But it didn't work out that way because Florida was very rich with wrestling photographers. And you had Paul Bauman in Miami, Dwayne Long in West Palm Beach, the great Bill Otten out of Orlando, Raul Gomez de Molina Jr. in Miami, shooting for just about every magazine. He had like 5 cameras strapped to himself at any given time. And I was waiting for Paul Bauman to go to his reward so I could, fill his place at ringside. I was shooting ringside, but he was Apter's guy forever. And, he was old when I first started, so I'm like, oh, it's just a matter of time. He'll drop off, and I'll be Apter's guy, because Apter knew me, and I saw that as my rightful place in the wrestling world, but it never happened. So he hung on longer than the Florida promotion did. He rode it out until the end. So more power to him.
When you're breaking in the business, were you initially kayfabed by the boys?
It's odd. Like, it was never even brought up. I mean, I saw some of the guys acting a certain way, but then other guys would be perfectly fine. And it was kind of, I guess, there was no reason to break me in, really. It's just if I was in the right place or the right time, something would happen. And some people act like you're just like a complete outsider mark and don't do anything around you. But other people figure, well, you're here, you must be smart, and I'm going to, conduct it as if you're smart. So one time I was shooting ringside, I was like 16, and Bruce was the timekeeper, Bruce Owens, legendary, he's the Quagmire of professional wrestling. I'll tell you guys some stories later. But JJ comes over to me, and he's like, tell Bruce to shave 5 minutes. And I'm like, holy crap, he thinks I'm in the business. And I'm like, so I want to make it all, like, inconspicuous, It's only in front of 5,000 people at the convention hall. And I'm like, ooh, who's even what? I wanted to make it really, so I waited a minute. And I didn't want to make it look like I was relaying a message.
Obvious,
so I waited a minute, and then I walked over there, and I hey, Bruce, JJ said shave 5 minutes. And that was, like, the most in the business I felt up to that point.
Yeah, it was, I was kayfabed when I first broke in. I mean, when I first went in the locker room, I remember they were Bam Bam Bigelow first broke in. It was just one of his first wrestling shows. Him and Larry Sharp were cutting a promo, I believe from Memphis, actually, at the time, at a show in New Jersey. And I walked in the room and remember them saying, kayfabe. I had no idea.
Exactly.
At the time, we had no idea. If you weren't in the business, you had no idea what that term meant at all. Mm-hmm. And I had to ask, I asked Ted Petty, Cheetah Kid, was my mentor at the time. I said, what the heck who's kayfabe? But how many guys nowadays are, kayfabe? And that's something we were talking about. I think that the business deteriorated. I mean, with the lack of kayfabe. Just because the business is exposed doesn't mean that you can't still carry on kayfabe, wouldn't you say?
Well, correct, because if you present something a certain way to people, it's gonna look like a shoot. It's like somebody like Cornette says all the time. It's not brain surgery. I mean, pick your issue, a real life issue, fighting over a belt, whatever, and then just they need to take stuff away to make it real. They don't need to add stuff to it.
No,
take
exactly
stuff away
right.
to make it real. I want to see 2 freaky-looking guys come down the aisle who have a dislike for each other for whatever reason. No music, no pyrotechnics, no stupidity, no vignettes, no music videos. And it's like, you want to see if you want to see kayfabe in action, you take a modern-day guy who looks like a monster from the past, who generates some interest. Today's version would be a Brock Lesnar or something. You take a guy like that, but you don't ruin him through buffoonery. And to his credit, he never went for any buffoonery, I think, because Paulie is looking out for him, and he really doesn't need to do anything he doesn't want to do. But everything he does looks real and believable, because the fan is thinking, well, he's not going to fuck around, you know?
Very true. I mean, great example, Howard. Great example.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was searching in my mind for who I was going to use for that example, because there are so few. There's a prime,
he's
there's
not
a prime
messing
guy.
Around.
Yeah, and I think you can argue that Brock's the only guy that draws money. He's the only attraction they have.
And correctly so, because, I mean, he's a legit monster, and I think Carmine knows this because he grew up in a big man's territory, and I did too, in a big man's era. And when we saw Superstar Graham, when I saw Superstar Graham for the first time, oh my God, it was like a Superman and a Godzilla movie rolled up into one. I just couldn't believe any human being could be so spectacular. 6'5", the sun coming out of his ass, radiation radiating out of his body, the most charismatic, impressive specimen I've ever seen in my entire life. And I'm like, oh my God. And I don't think anyone can compare to that. And I remember guys that were kind of close, you know, like second or third place. You had your Joe LeDuc, Ox Baker, Sailor Art Thomas. These guys were bigger than life. And whoever you are, in your hometown territory, you had those guys who just were bigger than life. And today, ain't nobody bigger than life, man. You can try to gaslight me all you want with Seth Rollins and Moxley and whoever. Fine, I give them all the credit. They're amazing athletes. And that's how you tell the sign of a true worker, if they say athlete or athlete. Only the great wrestling people pronounce it athlete. You look at Fritz von Erich, Eddie Graham, it's athlete.
Right. How many fans in the modern crowd actually fear any of the wrestlers?
Right. Because
I mean, I remember seeing Pat Patterson and George Steele in Asbury Park, and when George Steele rushed those barricades, oh my God! I mean, just cleared all the kids, everybody, just took off, scattering.
Oh,
There's
my
nobody
God.
that could induce that feeling again, I don't believe.
Well, you know what was so cool? We were talking about magazines earlier, and now you take somebody like me, for example, who started reading the magazines at like maybe 9 years old, and they have articles in there of like a compilation of Abdul the Butcher bloodying people and eating their intestines and being portrayed as a madman from coast to coast. How is he still allowed? How can this continue? And like all these photos of him doing these things, and like him and the Sheik. So the first show I ever went to was in December of 1975, and it was Abdul the Butcher against Jerry Briscoe. So in a Texas death match. And this was the first match I ever went to, and I had been raised and bred to believe that Abdul the Butcher would literally kill you and eat you on sight. So they start brawling up into the stands, not in our section, but I was just amazed, like, oh my God, this guy's a madman. What's going to happen, you know? And slowly but surely, as the years went on, I realized that no one's really going to kill anyone, even though guys like Abdullah were still feared, and rightfully so, because he would beat up the occasional photographer or fan or whatever. And it's guys like that that kept kayfabe. You know, if you got in Bruiser Brody's way, he'd kick you in the head. Like, that's what it was back then. And it's like, now everyone's protected by, sue the guy, and you know the deal.
Right. Oh, yeah, Abdullah the Butcher, Ox Baker.
Right.
Killer Khan. Stan Hansen.
Yeah, he was great. Yeah.
So scary when you'd wait outside the buildings for these guys to come in.
Yeah.
And they get out of that car and just give you, a glaring look. Oh, you've backed up. You took a step back.
Yeah. Because the magazines did these guys advance work for them, and they're like, Ox Baker killed a man. And then you see him in person. He's like humongous and mean-looking with the bellowing voice and everything. And you have no reason not to be terrified. It's like, you were sold the fact that these people were killers. And there was no internet, so you're 10 years old, and Bill Apter's telling you that Abdul the Butcher gutted a guy and ate his entrails, and you have no reason not to believe him. King Curtis, scariest heel of all time. Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah, he was scary. He could be in a horror movie without makeup.
Great. He was like the top heel when I broke in, like as a fan in 75-ish, 76, Florida. You can't beat it. I mean, see, we all have those stories. We all have our origin story as a fan because it was so vivid back then. It's how could you not remember it? But now, if you were 10 years old 10 years ago, would you be a wrestling fan? Or 20 years ago? Or in the Monday Night War era? 10-year-old Carmine?
I don't know. That's a real difficult question to answer. I don't think so. I honestly don't think so. Or definitely, I wouldn't be a fan in the same way. And, what's unique about us guys that were fans so long ago is that there's a certain innocence to it. Like we got our news from wrestling magazines that were 2-3 months old,
Right.
like news. So it was quite innocent back then. And I think that had a lot to do with, kayfabe, of course, and of course the lack of information out there at the time. Our fans are more fortunate for all the information, for the internet and so on, than we were?
Right. That is a great, great question. And may I say that when you look at it that way, wrestling is a microcosm for what happened in the real world. Because take that question that you just posed and apply it to any other genre of entertainment or life. Okay? Movies, rock and roll. Jimmy Page used to go out with 14-year-old ladies. So did David Bowie. So did Mick Jagger. How they're not going after them today, I don't know. It's probably only eventual. Thank God they're all old. But that's neither here nor there. What I'm saying is everything was under the radar back then. There were 4 top movie stars. There were 5 top rock stars. Whatever they did was their own business. They could be gay, but they were married, and you had no reason to doubt it. They could be with 8 million underage girls, and nobody would ever know. They could be the biggest drug addicts. Nobody would ever have a hint of a clue. And here's my answer to the question. I think people of our age are the most fortunate because when it comes to any aspect of life, and this is going to get deep and philosophical, when it comes to sex, growing up, education, socialization as it goes with other people in society, and how we conduct ourselves, I think that we were extremely fortunate to grow up in a time where we rode our bikes, where there were 3 TV channels, and we believed everything we saw because we didn't see the man behind the curtain. And there was an innocence to that time, and love was love, and you could find one girl in your class and obsess on her. Now, fast forward 30 years, these kids are growing up. They can see every naked girl in the history of mankind within 10 minutes. It's creating a generation of sex addicts and people who don't know how to socialize with themselves or their peer group or the opposite sex. It is a twisting and a perversion, and that, when you don't know the difference, it's one thing to have access to all that when you know the difference, when you know what it is to meet a girl in the flesh and flirt with somebody, not show your penis to them on a Zoom chat or something or whatever the kids are doing these days, you know what I mean. But I remember
we'd have to
being
take
excited.
A Polaroid and go to the post office.
Well, I have to use that panorama thing on my phone, but I digress. Anyway, the wide shot, the wide. Sure. Anywho's, and that's available on my OnlyFan. On don't forget I'm on ChatterBait every Tuesday.
OnlyFans/Howie.com.
Thank you for that plug.
You're welcome,
so,
handsome Howie.
I think for people like us who went through the innocent phase of rock and roll, of movies, TV, entertainment, we had 3 network shows, 4 movie stars, 5 rock stars, and the wrestlers could act with impunity. They could be complete showmos, and everybody thought they were like milk-drinking salt of the earth. So, yes, now it's great to learn every detail about everything and have access to every boob that was ever sprouted upon a girl in the history of mankind and all this stuff. But I think it needs to be balanced with the innocence, and that's what today's generation is lacking. So, would I want to be 10 today and thrust into this world? Hell no. Would I want to be 20 right now and have to make a sex life for myself? Hell no. Things were so much easier and more innocent back then. I'm a child of the 80s. We had rock clubs and people went out and got drunk and picked each other up and life was easy. Now it's like I'm omnisexual. I only like comedy wrestling and I like emo pseudo
Right,
music. You
right.
know, what the hell's going on?
So, James, how innocent are you?
Well, in today's world, it's hard to be. It's confusing times for sure. It's one of those things. I wish we could go back to that innocence, but alas, for somebody like myself, just sort of breaking into the business, it's definitely confusing times to try to, how can I be a crazier personality or do something crazier than what's going on outside your window right now? It's certainly not a time to be trying to, this sounds cynical, to try to be getting into this business, but it's definitely an odd time for life in general.
Yeah, because you know what? I blame two things for the downfall of society. One is the internet, and two is reality TV. And everybody wants to be a star now. And it's whatever, if wrestling is that vehicle, then that's what they're going to do. And they equate wrestling with improv class and acting or gymnastics or tumbling or a clown show or whatever. I was at an indie show fairly recently. This guy came out dressed in a bunny suit. And I said, somewhere Buddy Rogers is turning around like a Boston chicken on a spit. Like, what are you doing to our fine business, sir? I mean...
Right. Well, wrestlers now, it's been going on for years. The mantra is that they don't want to be wrestlers. They want to be stars.
Right.
And that was not the attitude necessarily back in the day. And also, I mean, and not to be critical of the guys today, but to me, it seems like they wrestle more for themselves than they wrestle for the crowd.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess kayfabe comes into that because to complete the formula of professional wrestling, I believe that you need to have kayfabe. That lends to the fans the ultimate experience that they can have. I mean, it's something they give them to talk about, breaking down that fourth wall. And, there are a couple guys, like you said, that, do that. And I think a lot of other guys should follow suit. And not just on Facebook, for crying out loud, or Instagram, and try to act like a heel, because some of the stuff is just completely so silly. I think that if guys could understand the value of kayfabe and actually how much fun it is, too, right? It's so much fun to do it, and it's a part of the whole formula.
It's a power. Kayfabe is a freaking superpower. Let me tell you a funny story that I know you'll enjoy. I'm not putting myself over as a manager, believe me, I was far from the greatest manager. I did great for my debut. I was never trained or anything, but I was a natural. I'll give myself that. I did great, didn't embarrass myself, and I worked with big names too. Relatively big names. At least there were workers. Denny Brown, Tyree. Absolutely. And I came out and I did that Blassie thing, where you take your arm like you're going to smack a kid and you're like yelling but you're not saying anything, and I was like, get the hell out of my way, you little... And I went up to this kid who was sitting on the aisle. I didn't walk up to him. I was like on my way to the ring, and I saw him jeering. I'm like, get the hell out of my... And he's like, I wasn't saying nothing. And I felt so bad. I'm like, wow, I'm not really cut out to be a heel, even though I am kind of.
You felt bad about it?
I did, man. He was just a kid, It was a small town. He wasn't like a big citizen of a big town or anything. It's like I felt bad.
You felt bad getting heat?
Well, I mean, from below, I scared a little kid. I mean, in wrestling vernacular, I was getting heat. In real life, I was scaring a little kid. So
yeah, but you're playing a character. Honestly, through all the years that I managed, I enjoyed making children cry. Then I'd offer them a cigarette.
Man.
I think I'm more of a heel than you are. You're a natural baby face. Handsome Howard.
Well, I mean, anyone that knows me, I don't know, I think there would be, I think people would digress, but yes, the kayfabe era was so much fun, both as a performer, which I really don't fancy myself much as, but I got to taste it, and thank God I did, because it was a definite highlight. Tremendous high, doing it, knowing you can do it. But the other part of that is, let's just say I'm a fan or a photographer, the fact of kayfabe, that like when somebody would let you in the dressing room or a big star would talk to you and drop the guard of kayfabe, or Barry Windham would talk to Jim Garvin in front of you and you knew that they were working together that night or whatever, or if Terry Funk would talk to you like a normal person because he knows that you wrote a magazine article.
Right.
And even though I was a kid, when they wouldn't kayfabe, you knew it was this secret underworld mafia thing that you needed to earn your way into.
It was an apprenticeship, essentially.
Yeah, yes, very good. Because, I mean, I broke in under Duke Tanaka, Duke Kiyomoka. He told me nothing ever about anything. I mean, it's just whoever takes a liking to you tells you this or that as you go along, you know? It's like nobody took me into a room one day and burned a Bible passage in my hand and said you're in the business. It was just like, as the situation dictates, you learn what you need to do.
Right. And today, the guys have the benefit of the internet. They can just Google in their hometown who runs local wrestling shows and, get trained in a couple months and be wrestling in no time.
Yeah, it's odd. It's really odd. This begs the question, and you're the perfect person who can answer this, is what criteria do you really need to meet to become a professional wrestler? I mean, consider yourself a real professional wrestler. I have my brief list of criteria, but I'm curious what yours are. Consider yourself a professional
pretty much.
Wrestler.
Okay, wrestling schools back in the day would try to make you quit, as opposed to today, where they're not rough with you. They rush training a lot of times too, but that goes without saying. But back in the day, they tried to make you quit. They tried everything they could do to not allow you in the business. And that would sort out a lot of the guys a lot of guys today probably wouldn't be in the business if they were around 30 years ago. A lot of the smaller guys, a lot of guys would be viewed as being too small, and they would be, they'd have to manage or referee.
Why do you think they wanted to find out if you were tough enough in those days?
Well, to protect the business. Because if you got into a fight, they didn't want to hear you getting your ass whooped when you're supposed to be a pro wrestler.
Right, exactly. And all that has been taken out of the equation because not only are there no more bar fights, the guys don't even go to bars anymore.
Right.
I mean, when I'm invited to a local indie show, which I have no interest in attending, I'm sorry, all you indie guys out there, and I'm not taking anything away from anyone. I couldn't do it in a million years. But I'm like, I'll tell you what, let me skip the show, but I want to come to the after party. And they're like, oh no, we're just going to the hotel room. We're going to play video games or whatever.
Yeah, they play video games.
Once in a while, you'll have an old timer who will come down, like somebody that I might know, and we'll go back to the hotel room and we'll all hang out and do it up, But I mean, it's pretty few and far between. Nobody really likes to hang out and drink and have a good time or anything. It's just, it's the whole lifestyle has really evaporated. It's
Howie.
I remember.
Excuse me. I called you Howie again. We'll have to edit that.
I actually like it.
You like it now?
To like it.
That's good. The difference is that the guys now, they're, instead of going to the bar and, getting loaded and sleeping with groupies, they're collecting action figures,
Mm-hmm.
They're buying replica belts. How many action figures do you own?
I have 1,700, but with an explanation.
All in the
with
blister
an
pack?
explanation.
I'm hoping you didn't open it.
Well, no, because I throw them all in the bathtub and I have a big battle royal, but that's,
Is that once a year? It should be once a year.
Exactly. Twice. My birthday and New Year's. My birthday and New Year's.
I would job Andre to Java Rook.
That's your buddy, Java Rook.
Absolutely.
He really fooled the wrestling world when he changed two letters out of his name and went to California, huh?
Or how about a replica belt? Do you you walk, you feel like you're kind of hungry, you're going to go down and get a slice down the corner, get your slice of pie. You put the belt over your shoulder. Honey, I'll be right back. Hey,
I just got a Don Morocco Intercontinental belt at the bodega. Well, somebody on the internet was complaining these plates look hollow on this NWA belt, and I'm like, rightfully so. It's a hollow victory. You didn't earn that. Did Sam Muchnick give you that? I don't think so.
Boy, are we getting cynical here.
You get what you earn.
Hey, tell us about your company that you have with your artwork, with your photography.
Okay, this is a big plug. Hardway Art. We're working on the website right now. And what I really want to do is give the wrestling fans something that's affordable but also mind-blowing. And I want to present my old photos in a new frame, so to speak. And I'm working on all these Andy Warhol-style pop art portraits of all your favorite stars. And I'm also working on a book series, The Badass Wrestling Photography of Howard Baum, in which I'm going to have books for, heels, babyfaces, Florida, Memphis, the Big Three. An ongoing series trying to utilize the best of my photos, remixed, remodeled, remastered for new eyes, and hopefully, show people what it was like if they weren't there. And if you were there, you can relive it all over again. So what I would do is, the website is being worked on. The best place to find me right now is on Facebook, Howard Baum, Baum. Also on Facebook, Hardway Art, HARDWAYART, one word. And that's the best way to be kept abreast of exactly what's going on with the company and all of the exciting releases that we are working on during these sequestered Corona times. And you can also find me on Twitter, Howard M for Magnificent Baum, Howard M. Baum on the Twitter.
That's fantastic. I'm going to buy all my Christmas presents right there.
Cool.
As soon as the website goes up, that's going to be all over the walls. You know, I need get some classy art here. So if it's a little Andy Warhol inspired, we'll call that classy.
Beautiful.
I think he's putting in his Christmas gift request
yeah.
already, the kid. You see this? First show.
Hey.
And he's already planting, you know what I mean?
I'm getting my shit in.
He knows that this kid's a worker, I'm telling you.
He's good for the business, man. I like it.
He's good for the business. Howard, thank you so much for your time, my friend. Really, I mean that from the bottom of my heart. You know, we're like brothers from different mothers, you and I. And this definitely will not be the first time that you're going to be here on the podcast.
Totalmente. Enjoy the show in good health, guys. Salud.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the incomparable Howard Baum joining us from South Florida. Now, Carmine, how about we take things a little incredibly strange and get a hold of the one, the only Vandal Drummond?
Now, that's a perspective everybody's going to want to hear. Because Vandal Drummond, man, he has a lot of wrestling knowledge and a great perspective of things, believe you me. This is going to be a great interview.
Ladies and gentlemen, from Hollywood, Florida, all the way out to Hollywood, California, joining us now, you know him from Incredibly Strange Wrestling, you know him from the 605 Super Podcast and LuchaWorld.com. He is the one, the only, Donkey Show Dominguez, the HIV Kid, Yom Rapport, the Televangelist, and Exotico Erotico, the one, the only, Vandal Drummond. How you doing, Vandal?
I am doing great, and God bless you for remembering some of my favorite gimmicks. I had so much fun in Incredibly Strange Wrestling.
I couldn't help. Those were just some of my favorites. We could be here all night just listing off all the others.
That's probably where I did the bulk of my gimmicks. I mean, probably, I'd say 80% of my gimmicks were probably all done under the realm of Johnny Legend.
I also have to put you over because I know you won't do it yourself. Undefeated in AAA, Vandal Drummond is.
That's right. I had exactly one match. Funniest part was the plan. Our plan was for the baby faces to go over, but the AAA folks wanted the heels to go over for some reason. So my one victory in AAA, my only match in AAA, but, seeing that it was on my turf in Los Angeles in the sports arena, I'll take it.
Don't let Conan find out. He'll bring you back in just to put over somebody like Murder Clown or Monster Clowns.
That there's a payoff. That'd make me even happier. That'd make me so much happier than being undefeated. Is when I got I also got to give a hats off to Ron Scholar, who was with the co-promoter with Antonia Pena on those LA shows, and just want to say Pena and Scholar were both very straightforward with their payoffs. No nonsense.
Let's pick it up from there. You were a huge wrestling fan growing up.
Yes.
What age did you discover wrestling?
I remember it vividly. It was the summer of 1972. I was 10 years old, summer of the Munich Olympic. A friend of mine was staying the night one Saturday night, and we're just clicking through the channels, and I come across Channel 13, KCOP. Mind you, I did not know what professional wrestling was. On top of that, my family, we weren't really a sports family. My family was more into, scholastics. My dad played classical piano, was a nuclear physicist. My mom was a former ballet dancer. So, there wasn't a lot. I wasn't familiar with NFL, NBA, none of that. And so we're flipping channels, and I see this bright blue ring with some stadium seating behind it. It was a TV studio match, but they still had like some stadium seating to make it look more filled in. And I see Fritz von Goring, this mustachioed heel, just beating the crap out of Sal Lothario. And so I just stare at it. I'm going to my friend, John, wait, look at this stuff. Grown men beating the piss out of each other. What is this stuff? And my friend just looks at me like I'm high and says, what is that? That's wrestling. And I'm just staring at this guy in spandex, raking the eyes of poor Sal Lothario, and I'm saying, this is bitchin'. Grown men just acting like these total miscreants in the ring. And I was in love from that point on. And within a few months, had my first hero in Raul Mata, who was journeyman for a number of years before settling down to wife and kids. And yeah, I just fell in love with wrestling, and I kind of liked that. I had no concept of what it was before I discovered it.
You witnessed a lot of the heyday there in L.A.
Yeah, I was 1 year late for the famous Tolis Blassie feud.
Another time. This is like the fourth time we've brought up John Tolis.
Oh, no way.
Today, yeah.
What's funny is by the time
James learned something. James, what did you learn today?
You know how you spell wrestling? T-O-L-O-S.
Right on. And the name of the game is money. You know, the most amazing thing about John Tolis was I was so lucky that I got to see him as both a babyface and a heel, because they would change him kind of back and forth. I think I'd like to ask Jeff Walton this. I don't know why I haven't already, but after like the peak 1971, the Tolis Blassie feud, which was the golden goose of Los Angeles wrestling, I think they were desperately trying to get that golden goose back and would kind of in desperation change people from face to heel back and forth. They did that with Tolis, but the cool thing is by doing so, you saw a totally different person with Tolis as a heel than as a face, because when he was a heel and he'd be doing interviews, he would like kind of tilt his head downwards a bit, roll his eyes up toward the camera. He would drool. He would make certain to keep his mouth wide open when he was cutting his promo, so that you could see all the gold fillings in his teeth to make him just look more raunchy. But then if he turned face, his posture was suddenly much better, and he carried himself as this stoic, handsome, Burt Reynolds type guy, angry for justice, for all the injustice that's been done to the baby faces. So I feel very, very fortunate I got to see John Tolis in his prime.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's just those little nuances back then. I mean, just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Back to Los Angeles, you saw the inception of Lucha Libre into the LA territory.
That's what was also bitchin' is, the very first wrestling magazine I ever bought when I started watching was an issue of Lucha Libre magazine with Psicodelico on the cover. And that's because I went to school in a Latino neighborhood, and there was one of these tiny little mom and pop grocers down the street. We got a great mix of wrestlers from Mexico, right here in America, plus a little bit of England, too. We got people like Lord Patrick Roach, David Morgan, Steve Wright.
Sure.
And, what gave me the biggest rush were the wrestlers from Mexico. I mean, Raul Mata, like I said, he was one of Diablo Velasco's students. And that guy, I think, is probably the most underrated journeyman I have ever seen, and one of the best baby faces. We also had Tony Rocco, who also was pretty prolific in Mexico and was known for being a really underrated shooter, somebody you didn't screw with in the ring. And then the greatest gimmick being Black Gordon and Goliath, when they were heels, they would insist on being introduced as hailing from New Mexico, and they denied that they were Mexican blood. Yeah, great heat. And the funniest part is that both of them spoke very broken English, so it was even funnier. Then if they would be turned, just like John Tolis, if they were turned babyface, they still wrestled really rough, Budo-type style, but they had a very stoic sense to them. The time I saw them where they were most effective as baby faces is when they were being managed by Louis Tilley, and they were feuding with the Infernos with J.C. Dykes. That was a great feud.
And J.C. Dykes got some great heat. Let's talk about that for a second, because we've been reminiscing about the old days. And one of the major things is, of course, wrestlers today will never experience that level of heat that the heels did back then, unfortunately.
Yes.
What do you remember some of the hated heels in L.A.? Like, who did you just despise?
Oh, Ernie Ladd, right off the bat. And I can tell you why I despised him. And that's the other thing that was great about being a fan and then getting involved later in the business, because just being a hardcore fan and just embracing the baby faces and getting upset at the heels. When I actually got involved in the business, I remember what pissed me off as a kid, and I knew how to piss off fans if I was a heel or what to do as a face. But Ernie Ladd scared the hell out of me. And the reason is because here's this big 6'9" guy, and he would just be beating the piss out of TV jobber who was half his size. And most of his matches, if I remember correctly, maybe just the way he intimidated me kind of casts a shadow, a rose-colored shadow over this. But most of his jobber matches were straight squashes, and not all the jobbers did straight squashes for the heels and faces. But Ladd would not only squash his opponents, but he would torture them like a cat tortures a mouse, because he had that taped thumb, and for good measure, he'd start jabbing them in the throat, and that they'd start spitting up blood.
Wow.
And, it was amazing. And then by sheer dumb luck, they had a blow-off feud with Ernie Ladd and Mil Mascaras that first year I was watching. It was taped, but it wasn't for TV. However, I was just switching channels on a Saturday night, and I came across the Spanish station, and for some reason, they were showing that night's matches from probably a month earlier. So I got to see the Texas Death Match between Mil Mascaras and Ernie Ladd, and it finishes with Ernie Ladd defeating Mascaras in the Texas Death Match. And as Mascaras is lying there, flailing on the mat from terrible things Ladd did to him, Raul Mata, my hero, rushes into the ring with this look of rage on his face and starts wailing on Ladd. And Ladd sells the first couple of punches, but then rakes Mata's eyes, and Mata just holds his face, just like as if he got shot in the face or something, like he's in dire pain. And then Ladd starts jabbing him in the thumb, and Mata just spits blood all over himself. I mean, it was more blood than you had ever seen on TV. It's like
Wow.
His whole stomach was covered in blood. His eyes are half open, and he's going into death spasms. And I'm 10 years old. I'm fucking freaking out. But it's one of the greatest memories I have. I mean, that's how a heel affected me as a child.
And not a soul in the house questioned the legitimacy of the whole thing, right? I mean, people would see it and they were just shocked. But
you're shocked.
So many
You're shocked.
people, yeah, an instant.
Well, here's the beauty of it. I was watching just long enough to know deep inside that it was work, because I think anybody in any territory, if you watch long enough, no matter how good and pure the action is, you see the patterns of matches. I could tell that when Mondo Lopez was making his big comeback against the heel, to not get too excited, because he's the guy who loses every week. But still, you want to believe in Santa Claus, and like the fans we grew up hanging around with in the arenas, they wanted to believe in Santa Claus till they were 70. And if you gave a good enough story, they would believe and not question it. That was the beauty of it.
Right. Tell me about when you your first inception behind the curtain, so to speak. When were you, how did you gain acceptance in the business? How did you break in? Because as a lot of folks don't understand, it was so difficult to break in back in the day. You had to kind of weasel in with being like a lot of us were photographers. Howard was a photographer. I was one. Heyman.
So was I.
Of course. Burnett.
So was I. That's
you
how
were
I got
too,
my
right?
foot in the door.
So there you go. So you broke in as a photographer, and then.
Well, and the way I got that, and I have to say, I have to always thank Tom Burke for sending me a press card and calling Jeff. Tom. Oh, isn't he great? That's the whole reason. If it weren't for Tom Burke, I wouldn't have gotten to take pictures and write stories. And if I didn't get to do those stories, I wouldn't have got to know anybody in the biz, and I wouldn't probably have never gotten involved, to be honest.
Tom had one of the newsletters, one of the original newsletters in the business.
Yeah, first one I ever subscribed to when I was 15 years old. I was like, I waited for it every month. I waited for it to arrive in the mail. It was such a big deal.
And even then, if you weren't in the know, you had no idea about the newsletter. You had to meet somebody.
Exactly, and that's what
had to tell you
that's what I love.
Yeah,
when I read the newsletter and saw results from all these other territories, it was so exciting to me, just because I felt like I was getting a look into something that most fans didn't get to see. And the way I got involved in the business was I got kind of a crash course to the nature of the business when first wrestler I was friends with was a guy, Tim Flowers, and he was working for Diamond Timothy Flowers. Yeah, great wrestler, so human being. But when he was working LaBelle, my friend Lloyd and I used to go to the Antone Leone shows that were promoted in Bakersfield. That was briefly, wouldn't call it really competition with LaBelle because they didn't really run each other's cities. However, it was announced that Dr. Jerry Graham was going to be there, and Tim Flowers, Dr. Jerry Graham was one of his trainers. And so he said, oh, my God, we got to go see the doc. And so that first night, he's powwowing with the doc. And then at the end of the evening, John Tolis, and this was John Tolis' greatest work ever. John Tolis walks up to me, and this this was when I was about 110 pounds and had this big, giant, bleached blonde afro. I looked like a walking Q-tip. And Tolis walks up to me and says, young man, I was informed you lived in the L.A. area. And I'm going, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, listen, I'm kind of in Woodland Hills, which is a bit out of the way of L.A., and that's where Dr. Jerry Graham lives. Would you do me a big favor, and could you give him a ride home? And I'm like, Dr. Jerry Graham? Yeah, of course, yes. So I'm like on cloud nine. And the reason I say it was Tolis's greatest work is because he didn't so much as snicker or crack a grin. He just... Of course, maybe that was self-preservation because he didn't want to drive Doc home again. And so Doc came out and was, well, hello, young man, how are you? And he shakes my hand, and he's super charming, super suave. And
big cigar?
Well, he got the cigars a little later in the evening. It was after the match was concluded. I had been drinking some, so Tim Flowers was driving, and the Doc, but it was my car. So as we're driving down Highway 99, Doc says, hey, can we stop at the store? I just want to get a couple of beers. And I'm thinking to myself, I shouldn't really let people get in my car, but it's Dr. Jerry Graham. Little did I know what I was accepting. So he comes out of the liquor store with a couple of beers, a couple of bottles of wine, a couple of bottles of hard stuff, and that's where the cigars come in. He had a pocket full of cigars he stole from the liquor store and just took them all out and threw them in the back seat at us. And he says, cigars from heaven, enjoy. And then I saw him do his Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where he started drinking and started letting out his war cry. And when he would finish a bottle of something, he threw it out the window onto the highway without even checking to see if there was a car in the next lane. And he's, doing his, you suck your mother's cry. And I'm just saying, oh God, please let us get home safely. And then not long after, he has one bottle of, I can't remember if it was whiskey or bourbon, but he's like, holy shit, I actually can't finish. I cannot finish the rest of this bottle. What the hell? And then he waters my dashboard with the liquor like it's a garden. And I'm flipping out and saying, what the hell are you doing? And he just very casually says, so somebody quiet this kid. If somebody got a pipe, just hit him on the head. He'll be okay tomorrow. And, at the end of the night, I said, I'm never going to hang with that guy again. But, a week later, oh, man, he was addicting.
Something else. What a great character. A legendary story of him. I believe he was driving with somebody and told him to pull over on the side of the road. And he stripped down, dove into a lake, and came up with a fish in his mouth. I think it's a Terry Funk story, actually. You've never heard that?
I believe it. If it was anyone but Dr. Jerry Graham, I would not believe it. But
and then of course the other classic, of course, is of course the situation with him and his deceased mother.
Yes.
You want to talk about that for a second?
Oh,
we're going
yeah.
a little bit off topic here. We're talking about the evolution of wrestling culture, but and actually, this story is so absurd. It's something that could not happen in today's society. It just couldn't happen. Go ahead, Vandal.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? Whenever I tell Dr. Jerry Graham stories, and I suspect people won't believe them because they're so out there, I give them proof and show them like a newspaper clipping of that. What happened was I always forget if it was 68 or 69, but his mother, who was like probably the most important person in his life, was in very bad health. He, I guess, warned the doctor, she better recover. Well, she didn't recover. She passed. And so he took, I believe it was his son, Jim, who was 12 years old. And so he took his son, Jim, to the hospital where his mother had just passed away, armed with a gun and a hunting knife. And just when people were trying to say, sir, you got to back off, he just pushed him out of the way and said, I just want to bury my mother. So he got his mother's body, and I always forget whether he took the body out on a gurney, or if he had her over his... Yeah, that's what I heard. Well, that's the other funny thing. This is the most outlandish tale, but Rock Rims and I were discussing this a couple months back. It's a crazy tale as it is, but people insist on making it crazier. Like, there were people claiming that he put the body in a car and took the body fishing. Another one that he was running down the street and tried to bury it in a vacant lot. Now, he made it out to the parking, and one of the officers I later learned was somebody who was a relative of his wife's, and he was able to, like, talk some sense into Jerry, but not before Jerry, like, plowed his hunting knife, I think, through a telephone pole or something. Yeah, and I think there was another incident about a month later where he was making a ruckus in his front yard, dressed only in his wrestling trunks, I guess giving the neighborhood a show. But I mean, I remember late at night driving home from Bakersfield, just stuff you didn't think you were with a silent movie comedian. You thought you were in a silent movie comedy because he'd be so wrecked. And he did this several times.
Like with Fatty Arbuckle?
Exactly.
Fatty
what he would do.
Yeah, he was a big boozer. Yeah. Big guy, just like Dr. Jerry.
And what Doc would do was he'd take a cigarette, and then he'd have a book of matches, and he would go to light the cigarette, and every time the match would go out before he got the cigarette lit. And I swear to God, he'd go through an entire book of matches.
Or something.
Exactly, that's what it is. And when the matches were gone, he'd start going, "Fire! Fire! I need fire! God damn it!" And one night he pulled out the cigarette lighter from my car and held it from the wrong end, and then let out a loud scream a few minutes later. And there was this K-Rock show, the new wave station that was big in the early '80s. They had some show called Rock and Religion that was kind of like that Saturday Night Live sketch, Sprockets, that they had this really know-it-all host he introduces the show one night to saying, our first song is by a man who has the most utopian visions and can bring us to a higher plane, Gary Newman, and he's playing the song Our Friends Electric, and Doc is just has this amazed look in his face. He goes, "My God, who is this man?" I'm going, that's Gary Newman, Doc. He goes, "Oh, yeah, he's beautiful." And he just looks at me and says, "You call him on the phone. You understand me? You call him on the phone. Tell him that Dr. Graham would like to talk with him about life." And he was dead serious, too. He wanted to talk philosophy with Gary Newman.
There will never be another character like Dr. Jerry Graham, and it's no surprise. I don't know, how many listeners are aware of this. I don't know if you're aware of this, James, but Vince McMahon Jr. Idolized Dr. Jerry. In fact, he wanted to be a member of the Graham family, and I believe he was about to bleach his hair blonde even, but he just loved Dr. Jerry and actually wanted to bring him back in the, I believe it was like the late 80s as a manager, but I don't know what happened there. If
Doc,
I'm sure there's a crazy story surrounding why Dr. Jerry didn't last long.
Yeah, I guess he walked a straight line for a few weeks, and then I guess he showed up at, I don't know if it was Titan Towers back then, but wherever Vince McMahon was perched, he just kind of burst in Dr. Jerry, form, 3 sheets to the wind. He said, "I walked in, and Vince says, Jerry, I'm having a meeting right now." And he says, "Oh, yeah, I know who these 3 guys are. Your name's Huey, your name's Dewey, your name's Louie. You're from the IRS. I owe you $1 million, and I dare you to try to get it back."
Oh, wow.
And then I guess one of the IRS guys is trying to calm Jerry down and said, "Oh, I heard you were in the 82nd Airborne. So was I." And I guess Doc said his response was, "Yeah, well, where were you when the bullets were flying?"
So created
according to Doc,
yeah,
and McMahon Jr. I think would have given him a lot more chances didn't get so extreme. Because from what I understand, Vince Sr. gave Doc more chances than he would have given normal people. Because, when he wasn't totally out of hand, he could be really charming,
he could draw.
Very fascinating to talk with, yeah.
Oh, yeah. The famous tag team match from the Garden with Rocca and Perez.
Yeah.
Against the Grahams he did team with Crazy Luke, didn't he, that night?
Yes, he did. Was it that night?
That's what I'm thinking.
I'm not sure if Luke was in the mix. I think Luke wasn't quite in the mix yet. But I might be wrong.
I forget who Graham teamed with, but there was a huge riot at the Garden that's documented in newspaper reports, and just the incredible heat. And
it was with the Bruiser. He teamed with the Bruiser, and they were against Carpentier and Rocca.
Oh, it was Carpentier and Rocca. Okay.
Yeah, and something I didn't learn until just a couple of years ago is apparently right in the middle of the riot, both Rocca and the Doc stopped trying to subdue fans because they were looking in fascination with Bruiser, I guess, was just snatching fans and just chucking them like potatoes out of the ring as they tried to get in.
Wow.
But yeah, that's the stuff of legend. If you go onto a newspaper archive site and go to 1957 and type in Doc and Rocca's name, you'll find dozens and dozens of articles covering it. It made nationwide news.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll ever see anything like that again, at least not here in the United States. I mean, maybe we don't need that type of publicity anymore, but it's definitely something that I don't think we'll ever witness again.
Well, I'll say the thing about the kayfabe days is I'm very glad they happened. I was very glad that I got to just kind of hang out and be a little part of it. But at the same time, in order for the fascinating stories we're telling right now, kayfabe had to die, because if it didn't, everybody involved in the business wouldn't be talking as forwardly as they are now.
Well, unfortunately, I mean, I guess it had to. I mean, wouldn't you say, James, that the evolution of the business, basically, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's one of those things that,
Absolutely.
Time marches on, and we could sit here and talk about how we long for it and wish it could come back, but at the same time, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. It's kind of one of those things, it's the duality of man. You have to weigh, yes, it would be great if we could go back to it and just have everyone believe it, and we could protect it, but there would be so many stories lost to time. I think that's part of what we need to do is preserve these stories. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on Dr. Jerry Graham stories, and those are the stories that need to be preserved. So at the same time, kayfabe dying hurt our business, but is doing great things to help preserve the history of it.
That's a very good way of putting it. Excellently put.
I really like that insight. Yes, I do agree. I do agree. I mean, we're at this point in the business, and it is what it is. And, Vandal, in our hearts, we know that there will never be anything like we saw ever again, that it will never be duplicated. Nobody will have the experiences that we did as a fan, as just a spectator, for all the great stuff that we saw. I mean, from kayfabe to heels being heels, everything. I mean, we witnessed the 90s Zubaz generation,
Yeah.
90s Zubaz cowboy boot generation.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
We saw the mullet era, yeah.
Yeah, with the fanny pack, of course.
Exactly, yes. And, it's
DDP
cool that
started that, actually. I think DDP could be accredited with that. Look,
oh, yeah, I think you might be right. I think you
he actually got me wearing a fanny pack because I watched his fanny pack and wore his fanny pack while he wrestled at the Meadowlands one night. And I said to myself,
That's
you know what,
cool.
I got to go out and get myself one of these.
If I thought back on it, I guarantee you I had some sort of fashion that was tailored after a wrestler I idolized. I can't think of it off the hand, but if I just sat back and dwelled on it a bit, I guarantee you something would come up.
Yes.
I still own a pair of Zubaz. I have a couple pairs, and they're the most comfortable pants you'll ever wear. All right, fashion be damned.
Yes.
They are very comfortable. I used to manage in them, actually, when I first broke in the business, and under the name UB Marks. I used to wear Zubaz.
I love it.
And then one night I worked for Sam DeCero in Chicago for Windy City Wrestling, and he says, why is a manager wearing Zubaz? He he didn't like the idea so much because the guys outside the ring wore Zubaz, I guess. But I wore Zubaz for years. I mean, inside the ring and out and everywhere in between. I was a big Zubaz supporter. I had the Zubaz shorts as well.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Like you said, fashion
yeah.
be damned. Fuck art. Let's dance, as Madness said.
You know I'm going to have to put in that photo of you in Greece, Carmine, with the cowboy boots and the snakeskin Zubaz.
Oh, those snakeskin Zubaz were hard to come by, my friend. Very hard to come by. Vandal, thank you so much for your time. It's been great.
Thank you, guys.
We're doing a different topic every week, and I look forward to having you on again. It's just been a pleasure. I have the utmost respect for you. Yeah,
and likewise. And I want to say, that'd be great. I just want to say the thing I miss most about Cauliflower Alley this year is getting to see guys like you and Howard and Neely and just all our crew. And it's, we got the next best thing right here. Thank you for including me on this. And, it's great to chat with you too, James.
Hey, Vandal, it's just like Vegas, except I don't have a mini fridge filled with Italian cold cuts. It's the same thing. It's the same thing.
It is. We got photos from that day.
Thanks again, Vandal. You be good.
Thank you, guys. You take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it, the one, the only Vandal Drummond joining us to end the very first episode of Contrary to Popular Wrestling. Carmine, I think we had a hell of an episode. I cannot wait to have even more fun talking with the great guest.
What a great time, huh? I hope all the listeners had a great time. We've got a lot of topics in store for you guys. Hope you guys tune in. You can follow us on Facebook, Contrary to Popular Wrestling. Any questions you might have or whatever, feel free to send them our way. We have an email address.
Yes, we do. That is contrarypod, CONTRARYPOD, contrarypod@gmail.com. Feel free to send us questions for whether that be a possible guest we might have in the future or just a general comment that would add to the show. We would love to hear from you. Again, that is contrarypod@gmail.com.
Folks, we're going to try to do this every week, but until then, we'll see you at the matches.
So long, everybody.